What's going on, guys? In this video, we're going to be looking at Next.js version 13, and we're going to look at all the new features such as the app directory. We're going to look at React server components and how to fetch data from server components. We're going to look at layouts, the new API route handlers, so all that stuff. Now, I just want to mention that if you're brand new to Next.js and you've never used it, you barely know what it is, I would highly recommend watching my other Next.js crash course first, the one that I did about a year and a half ago. That's more introductory and more beginner friendly. This is more for people that have at least dabbled with Next.js and want to learn about the new version 13 features. All right, so this blog post from nextjs.org will tell you about them, the layouts, app directory, data fetching, and all that. What I want to do is build a little project and show you all that stuff along the way. So this is what we're going to build. It's just a little application where we're showing some courses on the home page, and what we're going to do is create what are called route handlers, which take place of the previous API routes, and we'll serve some courses. We'll be able to search them as well. We'll have an endpoint for that as well. But that's more towards the end of the tutorial. What we're going to start off with is just getting set up. We'll talk about layouts, routes. So the way that you set your routes up is a little different when it comes to naming your files and folders. We're going to look at server components and how to fetch data from those. We're actually fetching data from the GitHub API here. And there's a loader that will just show automatically if you just create a file called loading.js or loading.jsx, which is really cool. So we don't have to say if loading or anything like that in server components. And then if we click on one of these, it'll take us to a single repo with some data from the GitHub API. And notice how the directories came in a few seconds later. What we're doing here is making multiple requests, and we're using something called a suspense boundary so that you can load in the data that comes in, but if something takes a little longer, you can just put a placeholder there rather than waiting for everything to load. So it gives the user a better overall experience. Okay, so that's what we'll be building. We'll look at some of the other little features along the way, so let's jump into it. Okay, so we're going to start up our project. There's a few ways that you can get into Next.js. We're going to be using Create Next App, which is similar to Create React App. So just navigate in your terminal to wherever you want to create this project and make sure you have Node.js installed. And we're going to use npx create-next-app. And at this time, if you want to use the new app directory structure, you have to do @latest. So let's go ahead and run that. We should get some questions. So project name, let's say next_13_crash. I guess that'll do. And then if we want to use TypeScript, I'm going to say no to that. ESLint, say no. Just want to keep this simple. We'll say no to having a source directory. And then it's going to ask us if we want to use the experimental app directory, and for that, I'm going to say yes. And then your import alias, we'll keep that at the @ symbol. That's just so you can import things from, deep in your directories, so you don't have to keep doing .. All right, so now we have that created, so I'm going to cd into next 13 crash, and then I'm going to open VS Code. And of course, if you're using something else, just open your editor and open up this file structure. So what we'll do is run the dev server. So I'm going to do that from the VS Code terminal. So npm run dev, and then we'll just take a look at some of the files that were just created. So let's go to localhost 3000, and you should just see this landing page here. So as far as the files, we have our package.json, which is really simple. We just have React, React DOM, and Next as our main dependencies. And for scripts, we have our dev script, which we just ran. When it's time to build for production, we can do npm run build. That'll run next build. And then to test that production build, you can run npm start. And then if you also want to use a linter, you can do npm run lint. So pretty simple package.json. In the config file, you can see that we have this experimental object with app_dir set to true, and that's because I chose yes for the app, the new app directory structure. So, and that app folder is right here, and that's where everything we create goes. All of our pages, components, all of our API route handlers, everything goes in that app folder. All right, now the first thing that I'd like to do is just kind of clean things up a little. So page.js is going to be our home page. So you can see this JSX here, that's what we're looking at here in the output on the home page. So I'm actually going to just completely get rid of everything in here just to keep this simple, and I'm going to create a new component. Now I'm using the ES7 React Redux snippets extension, and with that I can do RAFCE, which is React Arrow Function Component Export. So it'll just give me a very simple arrow function component, and I'm going to call this home page, okay, because this is a page component. And the convention that I use is always to use page at the end of whatever page it is. So let's go ahead and save that, and we should just see home page. Now, as far as styling goes, we do have our global CSS, but what I want to do is clear everything out of that, and then in the final repository, the link is in the description, you'll have a global CSS there, and I just have a bunch of custom styles. So I'm going to just replace that global CSS with the one from the final project, and you can see that now we have this really dark gray background color. And I'm importing the Poppins font and using it here, but in a little bit I'm going to show you that with Next.13 you can actually import fonts, so we won't even have to do this. But for now I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And just like with past versions of Next.js, you can use CSS modules, and you can, bring them into your components, but we're not going to do that, so I'm just going to delete the page module CSS. So the first big thing I really want to talk about is routing. And in past versions of Next.js, we had a pages folder, and in that pages folder, if we created let's say an about.js or about.jsx file, we could then go to /about in our application, and it would load that component. Well, routes work a little bit different in Next.13 when you're using the app directory. So what we want to do, and we'll use an about page as an example, we'll create a folder, not a page, but a folder called about, and then in that is where we can add different types of files depending on what we want. If we just want the page, right, if we just want the component, then we create a file called page.js or page.jsx, which is what I prefer. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll go ahead and just map out a quick component here. I'll call it about page, and we should be able to go to that route. Now for the moment, since we don't have our header with any navigation or anything, I'm just going to go to the home page and just add a couple links here. So let's get rid of that, and we'll just put an H1 here. I'm going to say welcome to Traversy Media, and then underneath that I'll just have a UL with an LI, and we're going to need to use the link component, so we're going to bring that in. So import link, that's going to be from next/link, and we'll put that in here. Now another thing that's changed is we don't put A tags within the link anymore. Before, if we wanted to add a class, for example, we would put the class on the A tag. Well, now you would put it right on the link. All right, but we don't need any classes, so we're just going to have an href. That's going to go to /, and let's just say home. We'll copy that down a few times. We're going to have about, say /about, and then I'm also going to show you how to have nested routes. So we'll also have one that goes to about/team. All right, so if we save that, we should see this on the home page, and if I click on about, we go to /about, and it shows that page component. Okay, and home obviously goes to the home page. Now, as far as nested routes go, actually on the about page, I'm just going to add real quick. We'll just say an H1 and say about Traversy Media, and then I'm just going to put some dummy text in here. Yeah, we'll just do that. Okay. So the next thing I want to show you is a nested route. So if I want about/team, I don't put a file named team.js in the about folder. We have to create a new folder. Remember, every custom route that you create is going to be a folder name, not a file. And then inside team, we create a page.js or JSX. And then let's say, we'll call this, let's call it team page. And I'm just going to put an H1 here, and we'll say our team. And then we'll just do a paragraph with a little bit of dummy text. Okay, if I save that, now I should be able to go to the team page or team route. Okay, about/team. And I could nest even further. If I put something in team, like a folder called Brad, then I could go about/team/Brad. So that's how the routing is going to work when you're using the app directory. So the next thing I want to look at are layouts. So in the past, with older versions of Next.js, you'd usually create a layout because you had an underscore app.js, which was like your main app component, and then you'd create your own layout component to wrap everything. Well, with Next.13 and using the app directory, we have a layout.js that wraps everything. So basically, it's just a component called root layout, and it gets children passed in, which is basically everything, any other page, any routes we create. And this is also where the HTML and body tags are. So anything that you're going to want on every page, such as a header, you're going to bring it into here and then embed it into this layout component. Now, like I said, this is the main layout component. And if you want to have separate layouts, you could go to, for instance, about, and then create a file called either layout.js or layout.jsx, which is what I prefer. In fact, I'm going to rename these as well. So this, change that to layout.jsx, and then the home page also JSX, which is just preference. You don't have to do that, but that'll still work just fine. All right, now in this about layout, we'll go ahead and create a component and call it about layout. And then this, just like the root layout, it's going to take in props and it's going to take in children. And then wherever we want to put that in the layout, we just output children. And just to show you that we're using the layout, I'm going to have an H1 and just say this is the about layout. All right, so any pages that use this layout, we should see this H1. So if I save that, of course, the home page, we're not seeing the H1, but if I go to about, we are seeing it. All right, and even if I go to about/team, we're still going to see it because the layout here is going to trickle down into any child routes or child folders. However, if we wanted team to have its own layout, we could also put a layout.js inside of the team folder. Okay, so that's how that works. Now, I'm not going to keep that layout. I'm going to delete it. I just wanted to show you that you can have custom layouts. You know, you might have a login and register page where you just want the box. You don't want any navigation or anything like that. That's a good example of where you might use a custom layout. Now, in the layout file, we have this metadata object. So this is going to be your page title, your description, your keywords, any meta tags that you want. And this is basically your global meta tags. So I'm going to just change this to Travesty Media. And then for the description, we'll just say web development tutorials and courses. And then if you wanted keywords, we could also do that. I don't need this many. We'll just go with this. Yeah. All right. Now, if I save that and we come over here, you'll see that Travesty Media is going to be the page title. If I reload that, it's going to be the page title for all of these. Right. Now, you're probably going to want to have custom page titles at the very least for your other pages, especially if you're building websites for like small businesses where SEO is really important so that they can be found. So what we could do is go into our About page. Now you could have a custom layout like I just showed you and put the metadata there, but you can also put it right in the page. So you just want to make sure that you export this metadata object. So let's say title, and for that we'll just say about Traversy Media. And if you want to have descriptions and keywords, of course you can do that as well. And now if we go to about, we should see that about Traversy Media. Okay, it's not going to show on the team. It's only going to be for that specific route. It doesn't trickle down into other routes unless it's a layout. Okay, so that's the metadata API. Now, before we start creating other components and working on our project, I want to show you that we can also import fonts. We can import Google fonts and some other types as well. But right now, in my global CSS, I'm importing it through the CSS, the Poppins font. So I'm going to get rid of that import, and also get rid of the font family specifying Poppins. And now if I do that, you'll see we go back to the default font for the browser. So what we can do is in the layout, or really in any file, but since I want this font to apply to everything, I'm going to bring it into the layout. So let's go at the top here and let's say import, and we want to bring in curly braces, whatever Google font you want. I'm going to use Poppins, and that's going to be from next/font and then /Google. Okay, and then the next thing we want to do is create an object. Let's say const Poppins lowercase, and we're going to set that equal to Poppins uppercase, what we just brought in, and that will take in an object of options, such as the weight. Now, the weight can be a string, like if you just want, say, 400, or it can be an array of strings if you want multiple weights, which I do. I want 400, and then for bold, I want 700. Okay, and then you can also add subsets. So for subsets, we'll say Latin. Now, to apply this, we can use this object, this variable, so Poppins and then .class name. That will give us a class that will apply the font. And I'm going to apply it to the body because I want it for everything. So let's say class name. We're going to set it to some curly braces and say Poppins .class name. So now if I save that, we come back here. Now we have the Poppins font, and we didn't have to bring it in through our CSS. All right. Let's see. I also want to just wrap the children right here. I'm going to wrap that in a main tag, and I want to give that a class name of container, which is just a class I have in that CSS file. All right. So we'll bring that into there. And that'll just add some padding and stuff and adds a little container around it. Now, if you open your console, you might see some weird errors, and a lot of times it's because you have extensions installed. For instance, I have LastPass installed, and let's see, it's not doing it right now because it is doing it. Yeah. So if you see something like this, extra attributes from server, it basically means that the server output or the server markup doesn't match the client, and a lot of times it's because you have browser extensions that add extra extra HTML or extra markup to your page, and it doesn't match. So you might see issues like this. Just try disabling some extensions if you do. All right, or just ignore it. But there's nothing wrong. We didn't do anything wrong in this project. We barely did anything, and I'm still seeing it. And I think I have LastPass disabled. I'm not going to go and get into it, but it could be another one. You can see I have quite a few Chrome extensions. All right, now the next thing we'll do is create a header. So I'm going to go into app, and any components that aren't pages, I'm going to put into a components folder. So in here, let's create a file called header.jsx. All right, and then I'm just going to use header tags as the wrapper element here. And we're going to have links in here, so we also want to import link. Okay, and then let's let's see, I'm also going to give this header a class name of header. And the styles should just apply because of that CSS file. Then we're going to have a container. I might disable Copilot if it gets too annoying. So we have our container, and then in there we're going to have our logo class. And let's have a link. That'll go to home, and we'll just say Travesty Media. If I could spell my own name. All right, and then let's see, under the logo, let's have a class of links, and that's where we'll put our navigation. So we're going to have a link to About, and let's say our team, and that will be About/team. And then we're also going to have a link to, let's say, code, and that's going to go to code/repos, which doesn't exist yet, but I'm just putting it in there. Now, I want this header to obviously show on every page, so I'm going to bring it into the layout, not into the home page. So let's go ahead and bring in import header, and we'll put this right above the main tag here. So we'll save, and there we go. So now we have our header, and we can navigate. Code isn't going to work right now. But what I want to talk about real quick are React server components versus client components. And this header that we just created, along with our other page components, are all React server components. By default, when you create a component, it's going to be rendered on the server unless you specify that you want it to be a client component. And there's differences, so I want to go over that right now. So I don't have any slides or anything, so I'm just going to paste it in this file, and this is from the blog post. So basically I have a blog post that is a written version of this crash course if you want to check that out. I'll have the link in the description. But some advantages to React server components are that they load faster because you don't have to wait for the JavaScript to load. In the end, you end up with a smaller client bundle size because a bunch of components aren't included in the client. SEO friendly, obviously that's a huge one. That's a huge reason to use Next.js in general. Access to resources that the client can't access. So certain packages that you normally wouldn't use on the client, like ORMs to deal with databases and stuff like that. Hide sensitive data from the client, so API keys and stuff like that. More secure against cross-site scripting attacks. And in many cases, it gives you an improved developer experience because they're simple. A server component is much simpler. However, there are limitations or disadvantages, which are they're not as interactive. So if you have components where you're going to have a bunch of state and you have use effects and you have a bunch of things going on, then you can't use a server component. With a server component, you can't have component state. You can't use the use state hook. Okay, in fact, I'll show you in a second that if you even try importing it, you're going to get an error. You also have no life cycle, right? It's just loaded when the page loads. So you can't use the use effect hook. All right, so there's definitely limitations depending on how interactive you want your components to be. Now, just to show you real quick, if I were to, in this header, import use state, and I save, I'm going to get this error. It says you're importing a component that needs use state. It only works in a client component. Okay, now to make this a client component, if I wanted to use the use state hook, all you have to do is go to the top here and in quotes, just simply say use client, and now you see that error goes away, and I could treat it like a normal, normal client-side React component, and I could add state, I could bring in use effect, and all that stuff. Now, since I'm not doing that, I'm going to keep this as a server component, which is normally what you would do in this situation. Now, the next thing I want to get into is fetching data from a server component, which is actually really simple. With a client component, you would usually bring in use effect. You have your use effect dependencies, which can kind of get messy and can kind of be a pain. Fetching data with a server-side component is very simple. So in the, let's see, we're going to have this code. This goes to code/repos. I want to create a route for that. So in app, we'll create a folder called code. And then in there, we'll create another folder called repos. And then in there, we'll create a page.jsx. Okay, and then we'll say RAFCE. Let's call this repos page. Okay, and if I save that and I reload, we should see this repos page. So what I want to do from here is fetch my GitHub repos. Now with the GitHub API, I'm sure a lot of you have used this, but if we say, if we go to api.github.com/users/ and then whatever your GitHub username is, and then /repos, that's going to fetch an array of your code repositories. So that's the endpoint that I want to hit. Now to fetch data, we actually just use the fetch API. In fact, it's kind of a superset of the fetch API. There's some things added to it. So first off, let's see, how do I want to do this? We'll just fetch the data first, and then we'll work on, displaying it in the UI. So I'm going to create a function, an async function, because I'm going to be using a sync await. So we'll call this get repos, or let's call it fetch repos. And then what we're going to do is just simply use the fetch API. In fact, I'll use this Copilot snippet. So we're setting a response variable, and we're awaiting on this fetch to this URL, and I just want to change the user to my own. So let's say Brad Traversy, and of course you can put your own GitHub username, and then we're just returning the JSON. In fact, let's say const repos. I just prefer to do that. I think it's a little more clear. So we're returning repos, so this will return a promise. So down here in our component, what we'll do is let's make this asynchronous. So async, and then above the return, we're just going to create a variable called repos, and we're going to await on that fetch repos function. All right, now before I do any output or anything, let's just console log to make sure that we got them. So we'll say repos, and I'll even put in the JSX, we'll just do like the name of the first one. So we'll say repos because it's an array. So we'll say 0, and then we'll get the, let's say, name. I think it's either name or title. Pretty sure it's name. So we'll do that, and let's save and go back to our repos page, and you'll see 50 projects in 50 days. All right, so we know that we're fetching it. In fact, if we look at the console down here, you can see it. Now, just remember, this is a server component, so if you do a console log from it, you're not going to be looking in the client, right? You're going to look down here. So just keep that in mind as well. If you say use client at the top and then you console log, then it's going to be in the browser. So let's get rid of that, and then we're going to start to create our output. Now, if you want to just copy the code from the repo and skip the output part, you can do that. But I'm just going to go through this and create it. I'm going to actually open up a new terminal because I want to install React icons, which will allow me to use Font Awesome icons. Okay, so now we'll come back over here. I'm going to import a few things. We want the link because we are going to link to an inner page. And then let's also import from react-icons/FA. And I'm just going to bring in a couple icons. So I want FA star for the Stargazer count, and then we'll do FA code branch and also FAI. All right, now down here in the output, let's see, we'll get rid of this. And we're going to have this wrapper div. Let's give it a class name of repos-container, which is just a class that I have in the CSS. And then let's have an H2. We'll say repositories. And then we're going to have a UL, and let's give it a class of repo-list. And then we're going to map through the repos. So let's say repos.map, and we'll say for each repo, then we want some parentheses. And for each one, we're going to have a list item. We don't need this class name. Yeah, so we'll have a key. Let's close that off. So the key is just going to be the repo ID. And then we do want to have a link wrapping around the entire thing, except I don't want it to go to the actual GitHub page. That's what this would do right here. I actually want it to go to an inner page. So it's going to be, let's put some backticks and say /code/repos/ and then whatever the repo name is. All right, and then let's see, inside the link, we're going to have an H3, and let's do repo.name. Then we want the description. We'll put that in a paragraph. So repo.description. And then we want the details. So this will be a div. Let's give it a class of repo-details. Okay, and then in here we're going to have a couple spans, and in the span will be the icon, let's say FA star, and that will be the stargazers count. And then we'll have another span, and that's going to be the forks, and then we'll have one more, and that's going to be the watchers. And that should do it. So let's save. And there we go. So now we're fetching all the repositories from my account, and we're displaying them with the title, description, and then the stats. If I click on it, it's going to take us to code/repos/ and then the project name. So this is a dynamic route, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. But yeah, so this is a React server component. You can see how simple it is to fetch data. We're not using any use effects with dependencies, with any weird stuff happening. It just simply fetches the data, puts it on the page. Now, the other thing I want to show you is the loading page that we can create. So when it's fetching the data, we can display a spinner, or if we just wanted to say loading repos or whatever, we can do that very easily. All we have to do is in the app directory is create a page or a component called loading.jsx, or JS or TS or TSX, whatever it is you're using. Now, you can see here, it's going to give us an error because it is actually looking, it's looking for that component, and it's not there. So let's go ahead and create this. We'll say RAFCE. And then as far as the output, I'm just going to have a div with the class of loader, because I just have this in my CSS, created a simple spinner, and then a div with the class of spinner. All right, and let's call this actually, say loading page. You can call the component whatever you want. You just want to make sure the name of the file is loading.js or JSX. All right, so now let's do that. Okay, so it's really quick. So what I'm going to do is in the repos page here, in the fetch repos, I'm going to just make it take 1 second before it loads the data. So after the response, let's do this. We'll say await new promise, and we'll pass in here, let's say resolve, and then we're going to have a set timeout until it resolves after 1 second. So let's put, I'm missing a parentheses here. Yeah, we'll just say wait 1 second. All right, so now let's save that. And if I reload, now you can see for 1 second, it shows that spinner. And that's just from creating this loading JSX. So I didn't have to put in, you know, bring in use state and say is loading, set it to true, fetch, set it back to false. I didn't have to do any of that. So if it's a server component and you're fetching data and you have that loading page, it's going to display, which I think is really cool. Now we're going to talk about dynamic routes, because we want to be able to click on one of these and have it go to that specific repo page. So what we would do, since I want it to be /code/repos/ and then the name, where the name is dynamic, I'm going to go into repos and create a folder with brackets and then whatever that name is. So in this case, it's the repo name, but In many cases, it's going to be ID, or you might have, title, maybe if it's a blog, something like that. Now, in this name folder, we're going to create another page.jsx. So you can see that the actual page for the route is always named page.jsx. You're not going to call it anything like about or code or repos or anything like that. Now here, let's do RAFCE, and I'm going to call this repo page, so singular. And let's see, for now, let's just save that, and we should be able to click on one of these, and it takes us to that repo page component. So to get the name, because obviously if we want to get the data, right, we want to fetch the repo, we need this name out of the URL. So to do that, we just pass in a prop of params. Okay, so params, and then I'm going to destructure this further. I could just do, let's actually give this div a class name of card, and then we'll have an h2, and I could do this params dot name. Let's try that, and there we go, that works. However, I don't want to have params here, so I'm going to destructure this further by just saying colon, and then I'm going to pull out name, and then I can just do name like that, and that still works. All right, and then under the H2, I'll have a paragraph and just say repo details. Now, I want to introduce suspense boundaries to you where it allows us to have certain loaders or placeholders for certain components that fetch data, because we're going to be fetching two things here. We want to fetch the regular details, and then I also want to get the contents or the directories in that repository. And I'm going to have them load at different times, and I'll show you how to use a suspense boundary. So before we do that, let's create the components that are going to load the details or the regular data and the directories. So in components, we're going to have two new files, one called repo.jsx. That'll be just like the basic data, the name, the stargazers and all that. And then we'll also have repo.dir.jsx, which will be the list of directories. So we'll start off with just the repo.jsx, and let's go ahead and actually we'll create a component first, RAFCE, and we'll keep it at just called repo, that's fine. And then we want to fetch the individual repo, and we're going to need the name for that. So when we embed that in our page.jsx, we'll embed it and we'll pass the name in, which comes from the URL, right? So this will take in some props, and we'll have a name. And we'll have a function where we can say const repo, set that to await, and then fetch repo singular, and then pass the name into that, right? And this has to be asynchronous, this function, and that's how we'll fetch it. Now we need to create, obviously we need to create that function, so let's say async function and fetch repo. So the endpoint is actually going to be api.github.com/repos/ and then it has to be the username. So after repos, you're going to put your username or mine, whatever you want to use, and then / and then the name. Okay, then we'll get the JSON and we'll return that. Now, I just want to test this out and make sure this works, so we'll do a console log here of repo, and then what we'll do is bring it into our page. So this is our repo page. We're going to import the repo component, and it's using the alias here just because it's, it's a bunch of levels deep. And then let's go, let's see how we want to do this. We'll get rid of this H2 and paragraph, and then we're just going to embed repo. We're going to pass the name in, which comes from the URL. Okay, we'll save that. And now in the console down here, you can see that it's giving me that specific repository. So at least we know that this is fetching, so now we just need the output for this component. Now I'm going to bring in a couple things. I'm going to import link, because I do want to have a link to the actual GitHub page. And then we're going to need some icons. So say from React icons, and that's going to be /FA. Let's say FA star, FA code branch, and FAI. Okay, and then down here in our output, let's get rid of that console log. And this can just be a fragment. And then we'll have an H2 with the name and a paragraph with the description. Then we're going to have a class of card-stats. And in there we'll have a class of card-stat. And that's going to have the FA star. And then we'll have a span with the stargazers count. And then this div, I'm just going to copy that down twice. This one is going to be FA code branch, and that's going to be for forks. So forks count. And then this one, we'll say FAI, that's going to be the watchers count. So let's say watchers count. We save that, and there we go. So we have just our basic repo data. Now, I want to get the directories as well. Actually, let's put a go back link here. So in the page JSX, I'm just going to bring in link. And inside the card here, we'll just say link. Actually, I want it to go to /code/repos. And we'll just say back to repositories, and close that off. Okay. Actually, I'm going to give this link a couple classes that I have. So let's say class name, let's do btn and btn-back. Okay, so now we can go back and go to this one. All right, cool. Now I want to have the directories, so we actually want to make another request from the repos dirs component that we created. So let's do that now. So RAFCE, and yeah, we'll call it repos dirs. And then let's see, this is going to take in the name as well. So we're going to destructure name. And let's see, above the return here, we're going to have, let's say, const, and we're going to call this contents, because it's the contents of the repo. And then we'll have a function called fetch repo contents and pass in the name. And of course, this needs to be asynchronous. Okay, and then we'll come up here and let's create that function. So we'll say async function fetch repo contents, and let's see, is that correct? Yeah, so it's going to be repos / and then your username / whatever the repo name, and then / contents. And then here we're just getting the JSON and we're returning it. Now I want to make this take longer, because that's going to let me show you what the suspense boundary does when we create that. So let's go up here and we'll say await new promise. And we're going to set this to, let's say, 3,000, so 3 seconds. Okay, so it's just going to take 3 seconds before it gives us our data. And then, let's see, for the output, from this contents, we want to get the directories, because this will give us everything. It gives us the files and all that. So I'm going to go like this, const dirs, and then we're going to just filter through, let's say contents, filter through, and here we're going to check the type and just make sure that it's dir, make sure it's a directory. Now down here in the return, let's just go ahead and add an H3, and we'll say directories. That down there. All right, so we get our directories. We'll have a UL, and then we're going to map through our dirs. So dirs.map, and let's say for each directory, then we want to return a list item. So we'll say list item, give that a key, and the key we're going to set that to the path. So we'll say dir.path. And then in the list item, we're going to have a link to the actual directory on GitHub. Let's see, dir path. I think I want to change that to path as well. Okay, so I think that'll do it. Let's save that, and then we're going to go back into page.jsx, and we're going to bring in, say, import repo dirs. And then just like we did here, we're going to pass the name in, say dirs. Let's save that. All right, so right now what's going to happen is we get an error and link is not defined. So in repo dirs, we just need to import link. All right, so you'll see we get the spinner, and it's going to give us the spinner for 3 seconds. Because what's happening is it's going to be in that loading state until everything is fetched. Even though the repo here is fetched right away, right? We get it quickly. Since the dirs takes 3 seconds, we still have to wait and just look at that spinner. So what a suspense boundary lets us do is load everything that can be loaded, such as this data here, and then we can have a specific placeholder for the directories component because that's what's taking so long. Okay, so it's pretty easy to add this. All we're going to do is go into the page where we have the 2 components, right? We have our repo, which comes back right away. We have this repo dirs, which takes 3 seconds. So we're going to import up here, say import suspense, capital S, suspense from React, and then we're just going to wrap these components, and this is called a suspense boundary. So we'll say suspense, and we're going to add a fallback. Now the fallback is going to be whatever component you want to load. If you want to have a spinner or something like that, you can, but I'm just going to say loading repo, and then we just want to close that off here. Okay. And then we want to do the same thing for the directories. So here I'm going to paste that in, except I'm going to say loading directories. And let's close that off. So now if I save that and I come over here and reload, we don't get a spinner for 3 seconds. Everything loads except the directories, and we just see loading directories. So much better user experience. Because you never know how long something is going to take to fetch. I mean, this stuff comes pretty quickly. I have a quick connection and all that, but it could take a few seconds, and you don't want to hold up the whole page because of that one request. So that's where suspense boundaries come in. Now, I just want to talk about caching and revalidating real quick, and I actually wish that I mentioned this earlier when we first started talking about fetching data. So by default, in your production build, fetch will cache everything indefinitely. And this is great for performance, but it can cause issues if what you're fetching changes often. And in the past, in previous versions of Next.js, we had get static props and get server-side props, where get static props would be for more like a static website where data isn't really changing, and then get server-side props would, fetch at every single request, and that's good for data that's often changing. Now, we don't have those different methods here. We use fetch no matter what, but there is an option called revalidate. And what that does is it tells Next.js how often to check for new data. So we're going to put this in all of our fetches. So I'm going to go to repos, page.jsx, where we fetch our initial list of repos. And what we would do is just after the endpoint inside fetch is we would add an object. And then in that object, I'm going to add next, which is another object. And in there, we can say revalidate. Okay, and then that's going to be the number of seconds that we want to wait until it fetches fresh data. And we're going to say 60 seconds. Okay, so basically it'll cache it for 60 seconds, and you can change that to whatever you want. All right, but if you're working with data that's often changing, then you're going to want to do this. For something like this project where we're fetching my repositories, I mean, how often is that really update? How often are you adding new repositories? If it's not very often, you might want to just not even put this in and just have it as a static website. All right, because at that point, it just fetches it once and that's that. But again, if you have data that's often changing, then you want to add this. So I'm just going to copy this object, and then we're also fetching in these two components, repo and repo dirs. So I would just add that here as well. Let's see, just paste that in like that, and then in repo dirs, paste that in there, and everything should still, work fine. And if you were to build this out now, and if you were to add a new repository, it would pick that up, after 60 seconds. If you don't add this, then it's not going to pick it up. So just keep that in mind. And you can read more about this in the documentation. Okay, now the last thing that I want to talk about, which is going to kind of take a while, is API route handlers, which allow you to create custom request handlers for a given route. So instead of having like a backend Express API, in many cases you can just keep it within your folder structure here. So I'm just going to close everything up, and this is where this API folder comes into play. Now, you can actually have route handlers within your page routes, so it doesn't have to be within this API folder. But if you put it in here, then it's going to be prefixed with /API. Now, it has this hello as a as an example. So I'm actually going to open up Postman. You can do this with your browser because we're just making GET requests right now. But I'll just show you within. Let's see. I'm just going to go here. All right, so I want to make a request to HTTP localhost port 3000 /API/hello. And you'll see I get hello Next.js 200 response. And the way that we structure this is similar to with our pages. The name of the route is going to be the folder, and then the actual code goes in a route.js file. Now, as far as how we structure it, it's a bit different than what we did with past versions. With past versions, we would have a function named handler, right? But here we actually call the function whatever method we want. In this case, get, right? If I change this to post, and then I try to make this get request, I get 405 method not allowed because there is no get for that route. Right? So if I change that to post and I make that, then I get hello Next.js. Okay, so you just want to call this whatever whatever method you're using. Now what I'd like to do is just fetch some course data, and I'm just going to use a JSON file, although since your route handlers are server side, you could use some kind of ORM. You could use like Prisma or something like that if you want to fetch data from a database. But what we're going to do is in API, create a folder called courses. And inside courses, I'm going to have a file called data.json. And then I'm going to paste some courses in there, and you can get this from the repository in the description if you don't want to type it out. But we just have some courses with an ID, a title, a description, a link, and a level. Okay, I think we have 5 of them. So I'm going to save that data file, And then in courses, I want to have a route. So let's create a route.js file. And I just want to have a route that returns those courses. So first of all, we want to import the courses from that JSON file. So we'll say import courses from, and then ./data.json. Okay, and then I want to send a response from this. So I'm actually going to import next response. So next response from next/server. And then let's export a function. We're going to say export async function and call it get, because it's going to be a get request. And then I'm just going to simply return next response. Now, if I do just next response like this, it'll actually return just a string, I believe, or just text. But if you want JSON, then you just add .json. And then courses is just coming from the JSON file. So if I save that and now I make a GET request to API/courses, there we go. I get a 200 status and I get the data. So what I'd like to do now is show this on the home page, right? So let's go back into our, I guess you would say, our front end, and let's see, I'm going to have a separate component for this. So let's see, in components, let's create a file called courses.jsx. So this is where I want to fetch the data from, and I'm going to create a component. We'll keep it, we'll call it courses, and I'm just going to import link, because I'm going to have a link to the course page, because that's in the data right here, the link, which I'd highly recommend you check some of them out if you want. And then let's see, we want to fetch, so this is going to be a server component, so let's say async function fetch courses, and let's see what it gives us. No, I don't want that. So let's say const response, and we want to set that to await fetch. And yes, that's what I want to fetch, is localhost 3000 /API/courses. And then let's do const courses equals the JSON, and then return courses. All right, and then inside the component here in the function, we're going to fetch our courses. We do need to make this async, and then we want to await on the fetch courses. And then what we'll do is just map through those. I'm going to give this div a class name of courses, and in here, let's take our courses and let's do map, and we'll say for each course we want to return in parentheses. Let's see, we're going to have for each one we'll have a div. Let's do a div with the course ID for the key, and I'm also going to give this a class, say class name of card, and we'll close that div. And then inside the div here, let's do the course title, although I'm going to make this an H2. And then I'll have a small tag, and let's say level : and I'm going to put the course dot level. And then a paragraph with the course dot description. And let's see, we'll have a link. So link href is going to be to, no, we don't want it to go to that. We want it to go to the link that's in the data. So that would be course.link. Oops. All right, and then inside the link, we'll just say go to course. And let's also make that open in a new tab. So we'll say target equals _ blank. And let's also give this class name of btn. All right, so that should do it. Now I want to bring this into the home page. So let's go to our root page JSX, which right now just still has these links. So we're going to get rid of the UL. That can just be a fragment. And then let's import the course component, and then we'll add that here. So courses. Okay, let's save. Let's check it out. Go to the home page. And there we go. So now we've created a route handler, which is essentially just an API route in Next.js with courses that are coming from a JSON file, but you could just as well have them come from a database, and we're displaying them on the page. Now, I'm also going to show you how to get query params. So, for instance, if we want to search courses, and maybe we want to have a route that's like /search, and then we want to have a query. So we could say like $query equals React. So something like that. So I want to show you how to get this value. So let's go back into our course routes. Actually, we're going to create another route at /courses/search. So in the courses folder that's in API, let's create another folder called search, because it works just like the pages. So this will be courses/search. And then I'll create a file called route.js in search. And then this is where I want to have, have that endpoint or that route handler. So let's import, say, next response. And I'm also going to import the courses, and that's going to be one level up. So /data.json. And then we'll say export async function get request. And we want to be able to get this value that's in query. And this could be called anything. You could call it queue or whatever you want to call it. But I called it query. So the way we can get that is by saying const. And we're going to destructure search params from new URL, and we want to pass into here, not this. So we want to pass into here just request and then .url. Okay, so this will have any query params that we pass in. In fact, what I'm going to do right now is just do a console log of request.url just so you can see what that gives us. So if I make this request right here, I'm going to get all the courses because that's what I'm returning. But if we look in the console, you'll see the request URL is this right here. However, you can extract the search params. So let's console log search params. And if I make that request again, you'll see we have URL search params, query, and React. And if I add some other stuff on here, like if I do ampersand and then name equals Brad, and I run that, you'll see that now name and Brad is on there. Now, to get a specific value, like to get React or name, we have to do search params.get and then pass in query or name or whatever it is we want. So if I do search params.get, .get, I can't see. And then we pass in here a string of query, and then I make that request again. Now I get React. If I want to get the name, I make that again, now I get Brad. All right, so what we want to do is basically filter our courses to that query. So I'm going to put that back to query, and instead of console logging this, I'm going to say const query and set that to whatever query is passed in. All right, now before we make our response, let's filter the course. So we'll say const filtered courses. And we're going to go ahead. That should do it. I love GitHub Copilot, and you can see why. Like, I didn't have to type this crap out. I'm not a very fast typer, as you guys can see, especially when I'm talking. So it's really nice for this to just, pop in there. So we're filtering through the courses, right? So this will basically loop through, and then we're returning the course title as lowercase if it includes the query, which is also two lowercase. That way, even if you were to type in React with all uppercase, it's still going to match. Okay, and then we just want to return, instead of courses, we want to return the filtered courses. So now we can take the name off. That was just to show you. But if we do that, now we just get the React course. If I do, let's say, JavaScript, I get the JavaScript course. Now I want to show you how we can get body data, right? I mean, I just showed you how to get query params from the URL, but what about if you have a post form, let's say to add a new course, you need to get that data from the body. So you need to know that as well. So what I'll do is go to API/courses/route.js, where we have our regular GET request to get all the courses. I'm just going to close this stuff up here. And I want to have a post request. So let's say export async function post and pass in our request. All right, so with a little help from GitHub Copilot here, basically to get the body data, we use request.json. So I'm going to actually, you know what, for now, because I just want to console log some stuff, so I'll just return, let's say, message course created. And I want to extract, let's say, const, we're going to destructure here from request.json, and I'm just going to get, let's say, title, description, level, and link. Yeah, so we'll just get that for now, and then I'm going to console log title, description, level, and link. So let's save that, and let's go over. I'll just open up a new tab, and we're going to make a post request now to API courses. And in the body, I'm going to go to raw, and let's add a title. So title, we'll just say my course. Let's do a, what else, description. Say this is my course. Let's do link, https something.com, and then finally we have the, what's the other one, level. Level, we'll say beginner. Okay, so I'm going to make this request with that body, and if you look in the console, we have my course, which is the title. This is my course, description, beginner is the level, and then the link. So that's how you can get the JSON data from the body. Now, let's say I wanted to create a new course, and again, obviously we're not using a database, but we could at least add it to memory. So we would want an ID. So what I'm going to do is go into my other terminal here and say npm install, and I'm going to install UUID, which will allow me to create a UUID, a random one. And then we're going to import that. So we'll say import. And the way we import this is, I think Copilot just had it. Yeah, that right there. So v4 as UUID v4. And then what we'll do is down here, let's say const new course equals, we want the ID set to UUID v4. That'll just give us a random ID, the title, the description, and the level, and the link. So that's our new course object. And then what we'll do is take courses and we'll push onto that the new course. And then we'll just return, let's say, response.json, and we'll return courses, which should include the new one. And again, it's not persisting anywhere, it's just from memory. But let's go ahead and try that. So we have our post, we have our data, let's run that. And now we get back a 200 response with our courses. And if you look at the bottom one here, that's our new course. It has the UUID, title, description, level, and link. All right, now I'm not going to actually have a UI to add a new course. I just wanted to show you how we can get data from the body. But I do want to actually create a search component. So let's use that search route in our front end. And this is going to be a little different because since we're now going to fetch data through the search box, we're going to keep refetching it. So we actually need to change it up from using a server component to using a client component. And the main reason I wanted to do this is so you can kind of see the difference in where you would use a server component versus a client component. Now we're still going to use the courses component right here, but we're not going to do our fetching from here. We're just going to use it to display the course. So we're going to do our fetching from the home page. So if I go to page.jsx here, we're going to do it from here. And we want to make this a client component because we're going to be using state. We're also going to be using useEffect. Because remember, we're going to have our search component, and that's going to be, constantly fetching data for whatever we want to search for. So let's turn this into a client component by just putting use client at the top. Now right away this is going to break right here because since this is now a client component and we're embedding a server component that's fetching data, this isn't going to work. So it does take some getting used to kind of see the rules of this and how you can and can't do certain things with server versus client. So I think that's probably the biggest, the biggest struggle that I've had so far with this. But once you figure it out, it's not that difficult. But what we're going to do is just get rid of courses for now, since we're still fetching data in that component, and then this should work fine. Now I want to fetch the courses from here, but since it's a client component, we can't do, fetch up here like we were with the server components. So we're going to be using useEffect and doing things the old school React way. I shouldn't say the old school because this is it's a client component. If you want a lot of interactivity and you want search boxes and stuff like that, then you're going to be using client components. So let's import, let's say, use state and useEffect. Now the loading page, right? Let me close that API, just make this a little cleaner. So the loading JSX page is for server components when you're fetching data. It just automatically works as we saw. Since I'm going to be fetching data from the client, that's not going to just automatically work. However, I can bring it in and just, load it manually. So I'm also going to bring that in. Let's go here and say import loading or loading page, from loading. And let's see, I'm gonna try to think of how I want to start this. Let's just add our state. So const, we're gonna have state for our courses because that's going to change depending on if we're just loading the page and getting all courses or if we're making a search and getting filtered courses. And then we also want loading because again, that loading page is only working automatically for server components. Now I'm going to have a useEffect. So in my useEffect, and we'll just have our dependencies, and we don't actually need any dependencies, but we're just going to have an empty array. And then let's say const fetch courses and set that to an async function. And then I guess we can just use that. So I'm making a request to API/courses and then getting the data, the JSON data, and then setting the state. Okay, and if you guys know React, then you know what I'm doing here. And then I'm just setting loading to false, which is actually set to true by default. All right, now we have to call this fetch courses, so directly under it, we'll say fetch courses. And then above the return, let's just check and see if loading is true. So we'll say if loading, then we're going to return the loading page. All right, so let's save that. And it's not going to show any courses yet. It's just putting it in the state. We don't have any output, but you can see the loader as it's fetching them. So now what we'll do is the courses component, let's go into there. And again, we don't need to fetch the data from here anymore, so we can get rid of that. And then let's see, we're not going to need this. All we're going to do is get a prop passed in of courses like that. And we'll display them the same way, so that can all stay the same. Then in our home page, we'll go ahead and bring in, well, we're already bringing it in, but we'll embed it. So let's go down here, and right under the welcome, we'll put in courses, and we just want to pass in the courses from our state, which gets filled when we make the request. Let's see what's going on here. Found object promise. This doesn't need to be asynchronous. There we go. Okay, so now we're getting our courses, but now this is happening on the client. So now what we want to do is create our search component. So we can close up that courses component, and let's create, let's say, course search.jsx. Okay, and this is going to be a client component. We're going to be using use state. So let's add use client, and we're going to import, we don't need use effect, just use state. Okay, and then this is just going to be a form. So let's start off, we'll just create the output first. So let's have this return a form, and I'm going to give it a class name of search-form, and it's also going to have a submit handler. So let's say on submit, and we're going to set that to a function called handle submit. And then within the form, we're going to have an input and a button. So let's say input, I'm going to give it a class of search-input, and let's see, the type will be text. We'll add a placeholder. So say placeholder search courses, and the value is going to be query, which is going to be part of our state, which I'll create in a second. And then we want an on change, and we're going to set that to function, and that's going to take in the event object, and we're going to say set query, so we want to set that part of our state to whatever is typed in, so e.target.value. Okay, now let's create our state here. So we have query and set query. The default is going to be just an empty string. And then under the input, we're going to have our button. Let's give it a class of search-button. And let's give it a type of submit. And for the text, we'll just say search. All right, now we want to create our handler. So let's say const handle submit. We want to prevent the default. And yeah, for now, we'll just console log the query. Let's just get this embedded. So we'll go back into our page. And let's see, we'll bring in course search, and we'll put that right here. Let's put it above courses, so course search. And there we go. So we have our form. If I type something in, Now this is a client component, so that's going to be in this console. All right, so at least we have that displayed and working. Now we'll go into our search, and instead of console logging query, we're going to create, say response, and we'll set that to await fetch, and put in some backticks, and this is going to be /API/courses/search, and then we have our query. What am I missing here? For query. Oh, this needs to be async. There we go. All right, so we have our response. Now we want our data, our JSON. So let's say const courses. Set that to await res.json. And then what we're going to do is have a function called get search results and pass courses in, because again we need to pass it up into our page, right? If you were using like Redux or a context API, then obviously you'd set this up differently, but we don't need that. This is a very small application. So this get search results, we just need to pass in here as a prop. So let's say get search results. All right, and now if we go back into our page, we can then, on the course search, let's say get search results. It keeps getting in the way. Now we could put a separate function in here called get search results and add that somewhere up here, or we can just simply add a function in here, and that's going to take in the results from where we call it. So right here we're passing in courses, which is going to be our results, and then we can just say set courses to those results. All right, so now if we come over here and I search for React, it's search, we get React. Search for JavaScript. Okay, if I search for nothing, it should just, show us all of the courses. All right, cool, and these should go to the actual course pages. So that's pretty much it, guys. Loading directories, so that's our suspense boundary. All right, so my main goal for this is just to introduce you to some of these new features using the app directory in Next.13. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned something. Again, check the docs. There are some other little features that I didn't go over, but we went over most of them, all the big ones. So that's it. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.